My name is Chloe, and I'm 38 years old. For the last 15 of those years, I've been a special education teacher. It's a title that doesn't quite capture the reality of my days. I'm a detective, a diplomat, a scientist, and on the hardest days, a fortress. My classroom isn't a place of neat rows and quiet recitation. It's a carefully calibrated ecosystem of sensory swings, weighted blankets, communication devices, and small, monumental victories that the outside world would never recognize. It's my calling, a purpose that settled into my bones long before I knew what to name it. I've never been prouder of anything in my life, and for just as long it has been a source of quiet shame and ridicule within my own family. I never imagined that the very career my sister Jessica mocked for years, the one she called my little charity project, would become the one thing in the world she couldn't buy, bully, or bargain her way into. And I certainly never imagined that to get it, she would have to stand before our entire town and admit to everyone, and to me, that I had been right all along. Before I get into how a dusty, fluorescent-lit school board meeting became the stage for our family's biggest and most painful showdown, I'd love it if you'd let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel, and if you have ever felt underestimated by someone you love, someone whose approval you craved, go ahead and hit that like button, because you will understand every single step of this journey, and please subscribe if you're new to the channel. It means the world to me to know I'm not alone, and that you're not alone either. The rivalry, if you can call something so one-sided a rivalry, started before we could even spell the word. Jessica is 2 years older, and from the moment I arrived, she seemed to have been handed a script for her life, while I was left to improvise. She was the star. I was the vaguely supportive off-stage presence. It was a dynamic our parents didn't just accept, but actively cultivated. I remember being in 3rd grade, so proud of the B+ I'd earned on a notoriously difficult science test. I had studied for weeks, making flashcards out of construction paper and quizzing my teddy bears. I ran into the house, clutching the paper with its cheerful red grade at the top, and found my parents cooing over Jessica's report card, which was, as always, a perfect, unblemished row of A's. My father was holding it up to the light, as if it were a sacred text. Another masterpiece, Jessie girl, our little genius. Jessica, already a master of performative modesty, beamed. "It was nothing, Daddy." I held out my test. "Look, I got a B+ in Mr. Henderson's class." He said it was the 3rd highest grade. My mother glanced at it, her smile barely twitching. "Oh, that's nice, dear. Very good." Then she turned back to Jessica, her attention snapping back to the main event. Jessica, never one to miss an opportunity, leaned over and patted my head with a pity that felt 10 times worse than any insult. "Well, not everyone can be a genius, I guess," she whispered, her voice syrupy sweet. "It's good that you're nice." My parents laughed, a light, tinkling sound that echoed the hollowness I felt in my chest. The B+ felt like a failure, a confirmation of my permanent 2nd-place status. That feeling solidified as we grew. Our family's resources, both financial and emotional, were funneled into Jessica's pursuits. She had the expensive horseback riding lessons, the summer camps in Switzerland, the private tutors for subjects she was already acing. Her talents were polished and displayed like trophies in a case. My interests, meanwhile, were quieter, less glamorous, and therefore, less visible. While she was learning to canter, I was spending my afternoons at our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable's house, patiently helping her grandson, a sweet boy named Michael, who struggled with his letters, learn to read. I would make games out of phonics, drawing pictures and telling stories until the jumbled symbols on the page finally clicked into place for him. I remember the day he read a full sentence from Charlotte's Web aloud for the first time, his eyes wide with wonder. The look on his face gave me a jolt of pure, unadulterated joy that felt more real than any blue ribbon ever could. When I told my parents about it at dinner, my father grunted from behind his newspaper, "That's charitable of you, Chloe." Jessica had rolled her eyes. Playing teacher, how cute. The pattern was set in stone by our teenage years. The final defining moment came during a family dinner, celebrating Jessica's acceptance into a top-tier, Ivy-adjacent university. The air was thick with the scent of roasted chicken and parental pride. My father opened a bottle of champagne that had been saved for a special occasion. To Jessica, he toasted, his voice booming. To the future chief executive officer, or senator, or whatever she decides to conquer, the glasses clinked. In the glow of their adoration, Jessica was practically incandescent. Later, during a lull in the conversation, my mother turned to me. "And what about you, Chloe? Have you given any thought to your future?" I took a deep breath. "I have, actually. I want to study education. I think I'd like to be a teacher." The warm celebratory atmosphere in the dining room didn't just cool, it froze. My father cleared his throat, setting his champagne glass down with a heavy thud. "A teacher," he repeated, the words tasting foreign and slightly disappointing in his mouth. "Well, I suppose that's a stable job. For a woman, you'll have your summers off. That's nice." It was the faintness of the praise that was so damning. It was an acknowledgement of a path, but a lesser one, a safe, small, unambitious path. Jessica, never one to leave an insult unspoken, chimed in, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Oh, Chloe, you're too soft for the real world. Teaching is what you do when you can't do anything else. It's a fallback." I felt my face burn, my dreams shrinking under the weight of their collective judgment. I didn't have the words then to explain that for me, it wasn't a fallback. It was a calling. It was the only thing I wanted to do. But in their eyes, the decision was made. Jessica was destined for greatness. I was destined for a quiet life of mediocrity. A footnote in the grand story of our family. That dynamic didn't fade with time. It metastasized. Fast forward 20 years. Jessica had married Mark, a man whose ambition and arrogance were a perfect match for her own. He worked in high finance, a world of abstract numbers and concrete, obscene bonuses. They lived in a sprawling, modern mansion in the most exclusive suburb of our city, a place of gleaming marble countertops, artfully distressed furniture that cost more than my car, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto a manicured lawn. I was certain they paid someone a small fortune to never actually touch. I was still Chloe, the special education teacher, living in a small but cheerful two-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, the side with more potholes and family-owned bakeries than Teslas and private security patrols. The annual Christmas dinner was always held at Jessica's house, a tradition that felt less like a celebration of family and more like a command performance. Last Christmas was the apotheosis of the form. The air was thick with the scent of pine from a 16-foot tree, and the subtle, expensive perfume of Jessica's friends, women with taut faces and husbands who checked their stock portfolios between the soup and the salad course. Jessica, draped in a silk kaftan that probably constituted a month of my salary, glided through the room, a queen in her court. Her son Leo, then 8 years old, was presented early in the evening, dressed in an impeccably tailored miniature blazer, before being whisked away by a nanny. "He has to get his rest," Jessica had announced to the room. Atherton Academy is incredibly demanding even for the second graders. The name of the school was dropped like a diamond, meant to dazzle and impress. Later, as I was nursing a glass of wine in the kitchen, trying to find the courage to mingle, Jessica cornered me. "Chloe, there you are. I was just telling everyone about you." She looped her arm through mine, her grip surprisingly strong, and steered me back toward a small group of her friends. "So," she began, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear, still playing with blocks and finger paint. "Are we? It's just so sweet, really. A perpetual childhood." Her friends offered thin, polite smiles. I felt my own smile feel like a cheap mask. "It's a bit more complicated than that, Jess," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't hear me, or didn't want to. She turned to the others, her expression one of profound, pitying admiration. "My sister has the biggest heart, seriously. She dedicates her entire life to those kids, the ones who can't quite keep up, the ones society forgets about." The condescension was a physical force, pressing down on me. It painted me as a saintly, simple-minded martyr, my career a quaint hobby fueled by pity, not a profession requiring immense skill, patience, and intellectual rigor. One of her friends, a woman named Cynthia, whose face was a testament to the miracles of modern dermatology, tilted her head. "That must be so challenging." The word was meant to sound empathetic, but it landed like a judgment. "I couldn't do it," Jessica said, shaking her head with a dramatic shudder. "You couldn't pay me $1 million to do your job. The smell of those schools alone, and the pay must be just awful." I tried to defend my life's work. "I actually just developed a new communication protocol for our nonverbal students using adaptive technology. We're seeing incredible breakthroughs in expressive language." Jessica waved a dismissive hand, her diamond bracelets clattering. "Details, details. That's all very technical, darling. The point is, it's a calling, a charity, and we're all so proud of you for having it." Inside my head, a familiar chorus of rage and frustration began to scream. I wanted to tell her about the intricate 50-page individualized education programs. I wrote legal documents more complex than any business plan Mark had ever presented. I wanted to describe the precise scientific application of sensory integration therapy, the neurological pathways we were trying to build, the sheer intellectual force it took to decode a child's behavior, and find the key to unlocking their potential. But I knew it was useless. To her, I would always be playing teacher, so I just stood there, a ghost at her feast, and murmured the same line I always did. "It's rewarding in other ways." The conversation moved on, leaving me in its wake, clutching my wine glass so tightly I was surprised it didn't shatter. My world, the one Jessica so casually dismissed, was anything but simple. My classroom, room 104, was at the end of a long, scuffed hallway in a public elementary school built in the 1970s. The paint was peeling in places, and a persistent water stain bloomed on one of the ceiling tiles, a brown ghost we'd named Bartholomew. Our resources were a testament to creative scavenging, and my proficiency with grant applications. The books were a decade old, their spines held together with packing tape. The smartboard flickered if you touched the wrong corner, but within those four walls, magic happened. My students were a constellation of brilliant, complex minds, trapped in bodies or nervous systems that didn't always cooperate. There was Sam, a 9-year-old with selective mutism, and a mind like a steel trap. He hadn't spoken a word in 3 years, but with the augmentative and alternative communication device I'd fought for him to get, He could write poetry that would make you weep. There was Maria, who had severe dyscalculia and would dissolve into tears at the sight of a math worksheet. But I discovered she could understand complex patterns through music, so we learned multiplication tables by turning them into drum beats on a set of bongos I'd bought at a garage sale. My class was part of a larger, more specialized entity known as the Lighthouse Program. It was a program I had co-developed with my mentor, a brilliant educator who had since retired. It wasn't just a class, it was a highly specific holistic methodology designed for children with the most profound learning and processing disorders. We integrated occupational therapy, speech pathology, adaptive technology, and a completely personalized curriculum into a single seamless day. We were the last resort, the place parents came to after years of frustration, misdiagnosis, and failed interventions. Our results spoke for themselves. We had a reputation for reaching children no one else could, and because we were publicly funded and utterly unique, we had a waiting list that was at last count 3.5 years long. As the program director, the final decision on admissions, especially the rare coveted emergency placements, fell to me. My principal, a wonderfully world-weary man named Mr. Henderson, the very same one from my third-grade science class, trusted my judgment implicitly. I was the gatekeeper to the only beacon of hope for hundreds of desperate families. It was a responsibility I carried with the gravity of a sacred oath. I had no idea that my own family was about to come knocking at that gate. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in early April. I was on my hands and knees, wiping up a puddle of spilled juice, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I saw Jessica's name on the screen, and felt the familiar reflexive tightening in my stomach. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some instinct told me to answer. "Hello, Jess," I said, my voice betraying my exhaustion. There was no breezy, condescending greeting on the other end, just a tense silence, followed by a shaky "Chloe, I need to talk to you about Leo." Her voice was thin and strained, stripped of its usual lacquered confidence. It was the voice of a stranger. "What's wrong?" I asked, standing up, the sticky paper towel still clutched in my hand. I could hear her take a ragged breath. "It's Atherton. There's a problem," she explained, in a halting, fragmented narrative that Leo's carefully curated image was cracking apart. He was falling behind. He couldn't read the simplest sentences. He was disruptive in class, prone to sudden, inexplicable outbursts of frustration that sometimes tipped into aggression. He'd torn up his worksheets, thrown a book across the library. At first, she and Mark had dismissed it as boyish energy, a lack of discipline. They'd hired tutors. They'd grounded him. They'd threatened to take away his privileges. "We thought he was just being difficult," she said, her voice cracking. "We thought he wasn't trying." But Atherton, for all its focus on prestige, had a team of very thorough, very expensive psychologists. They had insisted on a full evaluation. The results had come back the day before. "They're saying he has. They're calling it a profound learning disability," she whispered, the clinical term sounding obscene on her tongue. "Severe dyslexia, and something called sensory processing disorder." The world tilted on its axis. My nephew, the golden boy, the heir to the Lowell family throne, was one of my kids. He belonged in room 104. Before I could even process the information, Jessica's voice hardened, her fear curdling into fury. "And now Atherton is counseling him out," she spat, the euphemism for expulsion dripping with venom. "After all the money we've donated, all the time I've put into their fundraising committee, they're just getting rid of him. Like he's defective." Her disbelief was palpable. She wasn't grieving for her son's struggle. She was outraged at the social inconvenience, the blemish on their perfect family portrait. This is ridiculous, Chloe. It has to be a mistake. The diagnosis is wrong. He's a smart boy. He's a Lowell. We'll get a second opinion. A third. We'll hire the best tutors in the country. Money is no object. I listened to her frantic bargaining, her desperate attempts to throw cash at a problem that had nothing to do with money, and my heart ached, not for her, not yet. It ached for Leo. For the little boy who had been sitting in a classroom, day after day, while the world swam in a meaningless jumble of symbols around him. For the child whose desperate cries for help had been misinterpreted as bad behavior by parents who were more concerned with performance than with his pain. I knew this story. I had heard a version of it from dozens of parents who sat in the two small chairs in my classroom, their own faces etched with that same mixture of guilt, fear, and denial. "Jessica," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "just listen to me for a second. This isn't the end of the world. It's just the beginning of a different path." But she wasn't ready to hear that. She was still in the rage stage of her grief, and I was, for the moment, the most convenient target for it. In the weeks that followed, I became the unwilling audience for Jessica's frantic and failing odyssey through the world of elite private education. Her phone calls were arias of desperation, each one more shrill than the last. She was discovering a truth that had been utterly foreign to her. There were doors her money and her name could not open. The rejections were swift and polite, which only made them more insulting to her. I spoke to the headmaster at Northwood Preparatory, she reported one evening, her voice tight with disbelief. He looked at Leo's file and said, "We're terribly sorry, Mrs. Lowell, but we simply don't have the resources to meet your son's needs." Resources. They have a goddamn Olympic-sized swimming pool. A few days later, it was the Sterling School. They said his needs were beyond the scope of their program. What does that even mean? Then Crestview Academy, a place so exclusive they interviewed the parents' parents. They didn't even grant her a meeting. Each no was another crack in the flawless facade of her life, another assault on her identity. The roll call of prestigious schools was a litany of her failure. Finally, after a week of radio silence, she called again. The fury was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out exhaustion. "Chloe," she said, and there it was, the question I had been waiting for, the one that tasted like ash in my mouth. "I was thinking your program. You help kids like this, right?" The words hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of 2 decades of her mockery. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. A bitter, ugly part of me wanted to say no, to hang up, to let her sit with the consequences of her own arrogance. But the image of Leo's lost little face flashed in my mind. "Yes, Jess," I said, my voice flat. "This is what I do." A switch flipped. The moment she heard the yes, a flicker of her old commanding self returned. The desperation was momentarily shelved, replaced by the assumption of privilege that was her factory setting. "Great," she said, her tone suddenly brisk and businesslike. "So what's the paperwork? Can you get him in for Monday? I'll make a significant donation, of course, for the trouble. To the school, to you. I don't care. Just name a price." I closed my eyes and took a slow, deep breath, praying for patience. "Jessica, it's not a private school. You can't buy a spot." I had to walk her through the reality she had so long disdained. "It's a public program, funded by the district. There's a waiting list. It's 3 years long." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Then, an explosion. What? Are you insane? 3 years, that's absurd. He's my son. He can't wait 3 years. He'll be a teenager. You work there. You're the director, for God's sake. Just pull some strings. Do your job. Isn't that what family is for? Her voice was raw with entitlement, the frantic, panicked rage of a queen who has just been told her decree is meaningless. I had to stay calm, to be the professional she never believed I was. There is one exception, I explained, my voice level. An emergency admission. It's reserved for a child in acute crisis who has no other viable educational placement. It requires a full review of all documentation and my personal sign-off as program director. Her voice leaped with hope. That's it, that's him. He's in crisis. Maybe, I conceded. But I can't just pull strings, Jessica. It's not a favor I can grant. Approving an emergency placement means bumping another child off the list. A child whose family has been waiting patiently, whose parents don't have your resources, who don't have a mansion or a husband in finance. It would have to be for a reason that serves the program, not just my family. I was drawing a line in the sand, and she felt it. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of her ragged breathing. Then, the line went dead. She had hung up on me. For 2 weeks, there was nothing. A profound and ringing silence. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a part of me. A small, petty, wounded part that had been nursing slights for 30 years, that felt a grim sense of satisfaction. I imagined her stewing in her marble kitchen, railing at Mark, furious at a world that had finally, for the first time, told her no. She was facing a problem she couldn't buy her way out of, and the person holding the only key was the one person she had never, ever respected. The schadenfreude was a bitter, unsatisfying meal. It didn't make me feel good. It just made me feel empty. Because underneath the anger and the resentment, a deeper, more painful emotion was taking root. Not for Jessica, but for Leo. I kept thinking about him. I remembered him as a toddler, a sweet, giggling boy who loved to line up his toy dinosaurs and who would get completely lost in the patterns of a kaleidoscope. He was sensitive and observant, a quiet soul. I watched over the years as his parents tried to mold that gentle nature into something more ambitious. They pushed him into competitive sports he hated, enrolled him in music lessons he had no aptitude for, all in the service of building the perfect resume for a life he may not have even wanted. I thought of him now, adrift in a sea of confusion, his brain betraying him, his parents seeing his struggle not as a condition to be understood, but as a flaw to be corrected. He was alone, and the thought was a constant, dull ache in my chest. I was torn between my duty to the dozens of other children on my list and the primal, undeniable pull of family. He was my nephew. He was blood. What was I supposed to do? The doorbell rang on a rainy Saturday morning. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door and my breath caught in my throat. It was Jessica. She was just standing there on my worn-out welcome mat, with no coat, her expensive silk blouse soaked through and clinging to her shoulders. Her hair was a mess, plastered to her forehead by the rain. Her makeup was smudged, dark streaks running from the corners of her eyes. She looked smaller, somehow, defeated. This was not the imperious queen of Christmas dinner. This was a refugee. She wasn't holding a bottle of wine or a designer pastry box as a pretense for a visit. She was just there, empty-handed and broken. It was the first time in my entire life I had ever seen my sister look anything less than perfect. "Jess," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She looked up, and her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. Can I? Can I come in? She asked, her voice a fragile thread. I stepped back and let her in. She dripped onto my cheap laminate flooring, looking around my small, cluttered living room, as if she'd never seen such a place before. She didn't sit down, she just stood in the center of the room, hugging herself, shivering. We were rejected, she said, her voice flat, by everyone. Even the damn online academies won't take him. The tutors, the last one quit yesterday. She said he's unreachable. She finally looked at me, her gaze desperate and pleading. I don't know what to do, Chloe. I have called everyone. I have offered to build them libraries, science wings. No one will help us. Her composure finally shattered. A dry, ragged sob escaped her lips. I was wrong, she choked out, the words seeming to physically pain her. About everything, about your job, your life. I was so stupid, I didn't understand. I mocked you, I was an idiot. She took a shaky step closer. Please, Chloe, you're his only hope, our only hope. What do I have to do? I'll do anything, please. It wasn't the beautiful, heartfelt apology of a movie scene. It was raw, and ugly, and born of absolute desperation. She wasn't redeemed, she was just out of options. And in that moment, looking at the ruin of my magnificent sister, an idea began to form in my mind. It was cold and hard and terrifyingly just. I looked at her, at the woman who had spent a lifetime, making me feel small, now looking smaller than I could ever have imagined. The desire for revenge, that petty, bitter impulse, was still there, a faint whisper in the back of my mind. It would have been so easy to say no, so easy to close the door and let her walk back out into the rain. But then I saw Leo's face in my mind's eye, and I knew this couldn't be about me and her. It had to be about him. And it had to be about more than just him. I took a breath, and the words came out, calm and measured, as if someone else were speaking them. There's a district school board meeting on Thursday night, I began. Jessica looked up, her expression confused, like a student who has lost the thread of a lecture. They're discussing the budget for next year. And like every year, my program, the Lighthouse program, is on the chopping block. The board sees it as a luxury, an expensive extras for a handful of difficult kids. They don't see the value. They just see the cost. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before I delivered the rest. You want an emergency spot for Leo? A spot that will leapfrog him over 36 other desperate families. You have to earn it, not for me. For him. I watched her face, saw the flicker of hope in her eyes, and I knew I had her. You will come to that meeting, Jessica. You and Mark, you will sign up for the public comment period, and you will stand up at that podium, in front of the entire board, in front of teachers and parents from all over the district, and you will tell them why this program, why public school teachers are essential. Her eyes widened in horror as she began to understand. You will use your name, the Lowell name, the one that gets you front row seats at charity galas, and you will advocate for us. You will tell them the complete, unvarnished story. You'll tell them about Atherton and Northwood Prep. You'll tell them how every expensive, elite private institution in this state failed your son, and you will tell them that this little, underfunded public school program is his last and only hope. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a near whisper. There will be no donation, no secret check written to the school. Your voice, your public humiliation. That's the price of admission. That's the only currency I will accept. The color drained from her face. She looked like I had slapped her. This was so much worse than writing a check. A check was anonymous, easy. This was a public crucifixion of her entire identity. She would have to stand up in a room full of ordinary people, the kind of people she'd spent her life ignoring or looking down on, and confess her failure. She'd have to admit that her son was not perfect, that her wealth was not all-powerful, and that her entire value system was a sham. The war on her face was epic. I saw pride battling desperation, shame fighting against love for her son. You'd make me do that?" she stammered, her voice trembling with a mixture of outrage and disbelief. I stood my ground, my heart a cold, steady drum in my chest. "I'm not making you do anything, Jessica," I said, my voice as calm and unyielding as granite. "I am telling you what it will take for me to risk my professional integrity and sign the papers for an emergency placement. This isn't for you, it's not even for me. This is for Leo, and it's for every other child on my list whose parents don't have a sister they can call in the middle of a crisis. The choice is yours." The night of the school board meeting was exactly as dreary as I knew it would be. The auditorium at the district headquarters smelled of stale coffee and institutional floor wax. The lighting was a sickly buzzing fluorescent that made everyone look tired and gray. I sat in the back, my hands clammy, a nervous knot tightening in my gut. I watched the board members arrange their papers on the dais, their faces etched with a familiar weary boredom. A handful of other teachers, and a few concerned-looking parents, were scattered throughout the uncomfortable plastic seats. I started to think she wouldn't come, that her pride, in the end, would win out. Then the double doors at the back of the auditorium swung open. Jessica and Mark slipped in, moving with the awkward self-consciousness of aliens visiting a strange and hostile planet. Jessica wore a simple black dress, but it was still clearly more expensive than anything else in the room. Mark's suit was impeccably tailored. They looked like they had taken a wrong turn on their way to the opera. They saw me, and I gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod toward two empty seats a few rows ahead of me. They sat, stiff and silent, not looking at each other. The meeting droned on. There were presentations on bus routes, debates over textbook procurement policies, a lengthy report on standardized test scores. I watched my sister. She was pale, her knuckles white, where she gripped her purse. Mark kept leaning over, whispering in her ear. I could guess what he was saying. "Let's go. This is insane. We'll find another way. This is beneath you." I felt a flicker of doubt, a surge of pity. I was asking her to perform a kind of ritual sacrifice of her ego. Was it fair? Was it right? Then I thought about Sam and Maria, and the other kids in my class, and the dozens on my waiting list, and the cold resolve returned. The board chair, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Albright, finally announced, "We will now open the floor for a brief period of public comment. Please keep your remarks to 3 minutes." My heart began to pound. A man got up to complain about the quality of the cafeteria food. A woman argued for a later school start time. My breath hitched in my throat. This was it. Then I saw her move. Jessica stood up, her movements stiff and robotic, and walked toward the podium at the front of the room. The sound of her expensive heels clicking on the linoleum floor was unnaturally loud in the quiet room. She reached the podium and gripped its sides, as if she were afraid she would fall over. "Good evening," she began, her voice small and shaky. "My name is Jessica Lowell." There was a ripple of recognition in the room. A few of the board members, who had been slumping in their chairs, sat up a little straighter. They knew the Lowell name. The Lowells had paid for the new scoreboard at the high school football field. their name emblazoned on it in large, proud letters. Jessica took a deep, shuddering breath. "I'm here tonight to talk about the Lighthouse program." She started to tell the story. The whole unvarnished, humiliating story. She talked about her son Leo. She didn't use euphemisms. She used the real words, the ones she had choked on when she'd first said them to me. "My son has a profound learning disability," she said, her voice gaining a strange raw power. "He has severe dyslexia and sensory processing disorder." She named the schools, the bastions of privilege she had once worshipped. "We took him to Atherton Academy. We took him to Northwood Prep. We took him to Sterling. They have beautiful campuses and billion-dollar endowments. And every single one of them told us they couldn't help him, that his needs were too great." Then she did something I never expected. She paused, and her eyes scanned the room until they found me, sitting in the shadows at the back, her gaze locked with mine, and it felt like the whole world fell away. "For years," she said, her voice now thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name, "I have completely and willfully misunderstood the work that my own sister, Chloe, does." I could feel the eyes of the room shifting toward me. I thought of her job as a charity, a lesser calling. I was arrogant, and I was ignorant, and I was wrong. A tear spilled over and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. The most prestigious, most expensive schools in this state looked at my son and saw a problem they didn't want. But my sister, her program, right here, in this public school district, a program that I have just learned you are considering cutting, is the only place that offered him not just a spot, but a genuine sense of hope. It is not a frill, it is not an extra. It is a lifeline. Her voice rose, filled with a righteous fire I had never heard from her before. "You shouldn't be cutting its budget. You should be doubling it. You should be giving teachers like my sister a medal for the miracles they perform every single day, with no resources, and even less recognition." She stopped, her chest heaving. The auditorium was utterly, profoundly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Then, from the row in front of me, a teacher started to clap. It was a slow, deliberate clap. Then another teacher joined in, a parent. Soon, the entire room was filled with applause, a wave of sound that washed over the stunned faces of the board members. Jessica just stood there for a second, looking dazed. Then she turned and walked, almost blindly, back to her seat next to Mark, her face a blotchy, tear-stained mess. The transaction was complete. She had paid the price. I found her and Mark outside in the parking lot, standing awkwardly by their sleek black SUV. The applause had died down, and the reality of what she had just done seemed to be settling over her. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She just stared at the wet pavement. "I did it," she said, her voice flat. So, I looked at her, at my proud, formidable sister, who had just publicly stripped herself of all her armor. The triumph I thought I would feel wasn't there. There was just a deep, quiet sadness for all the years we had wasted. I gave a single decisive nod. "I'll be at the office early tomorrow. I'll sign the emergency placement papers then." I paused and then added the words that were the most important part of the entire exchange. "For Leo, I didn't say thank you. I didn't offer a hug or a comforting word. The chasm between us was still too wide for that. I simply turned and walked to my own sensible, slightly dented sedan, leaving her alone with her husband and the echoes of her public confession. The real work, for all of us, was just beginning. Leo's first day at a public school was a study in contrasts. He arrived clinging to Jessica's hand, his eyes wide with terror. The school, with its scuffed linoleum floors and faded posters, must have looked like a different planet compared to the polished halls of Atherton. Other kids were running and shouting, a chaotic symphony that made Leo flinch and press himself closer to his mother's leg. I met them at the front door. I saw the fear in his eyes, and I knew my first job was to earn his trust. I didn't talk to Jessica. I knelt down, so I was at his eye level. "Hi, Leo," I said softly. "My name is Chloe. It's really nice to meet you. I hear you're a big fan of dinosaurs." His eyes flickered with a tiny spark of interest. I didn't rush him. I just waited. "I have something really cool to show you," I said. "Want to see?" He gave the slightest of nods. I led him not to my noisy classroom, but down the hall to our sensory room, a small quiet space I'd created out of a converted storage closet. It had a therapy swing hanging from a reinforced beam, a bin full of kinetic sand, and a set of weighted blankets. His eyes went straight to the swing. "You can try it if you want," I offered. He hesitated, then slowly let go of his mother's hand and walked toward it. As he sat and began to gently rock, I saw the tension in his small shoulders begin to dissolve. I introduced him to Sam, my student with selective mutism, who was already in the room, working on a puzzle. Sam looked up, and without a word, he picked up his AAC device and typed HELLOLEO. Leo watched, mesmerized, as the machine spoke the words in its robotic voice. For the first time all morning, a real smile, small but genuine, touched his lips. From the doorway, Jessica watched the entire exchange, her face a complex mask of relief, confusion, and a dawning painful understanding. She was seeing for the first time what her son truly needed: not prestige, but patience; not pressure, but a place to feel safe. A week later, Jessica asked to meet for coffee. The meeting was painfully awkward. We sat at a tiny table, the ghost of 1,000 bitter conversations between us. She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a checkbook. "I wanted to give you this," she said, sliding a folded check across the table. "Just a personal thank you for everything." I didn't even look at it. I slid it right back to her. "I don't want your money, Jessica." Her face fell. "But I want to help." "I know you do," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "So help. The program needs funding, not me. The PTA is trying to raise money for new adaptive technology. Our sensory room needs a new floor mat. If you want to help, join the PTA. Organize a fundraiser. Use those event planning skills you're so proud of for something real." She looked genuinely stunned. Writing a check was her native language. This was a foreign dialect she didn't understand. "I don't know how to do that," she stammered. "I don't know any of those people." I just took a sip of my coffee and looked her straight in the eye. "You'll learn." And she did. It was a clumsy, halting process. She showed up to her first PTA meeting in a cashmere sweater and designer jeans, looking wildly out of place among the other mothers in their yoga pants and hoodies. She was quiet for the first few meetings, just listening, a humbled observer. But then, when the discussion turned to the annual bake sale, a notoriously disorganized affair, something in her clicked. She spoke up, her voice hesitant at first, and offered to create a spreadsheet to organize volunteers. She designed a flyer. She used her social media savvy to create an online pre-order system. The other moms, initially wary of the rich woman in their midst, started to see her value. The bake sale that year raised more money than it had in the previous 3 years combined. It was a small, silly thing, a bake sale, but for Jessica, it was a first step into a world where her worth was defined by her contribution, not her credit limit. I kept my distance, giving her space to find her own way. My focus was on Leo. I sent home the same official progress reports I sent to all my parents, detailing his small but monumental victories. Leo successfully identified the letters B, D, and P this week. Leo independently chose to use the sensory swing to self-regulate. During a moment of frustration, Leo initiated a non-verbal game of catch with a classmate during recess. Each one of these notes was a testament to the hard work he was doing, the new pathways his brain was forging. I knew Jessica was reading them, because sometimes she would email me back with a simple 2-word reply. Thank you. A year can change everything. The annual spring carnival was a chaotic, joyful explosion of color and sound on the school's athletic fields. I was manning the ring toss booth when I saw them. Jessica was running the cotton candy machine, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail, a smear of pink sugar on her cheek. She was laughing, a real unforced laugh, as she joked with one of the other PTA moms. She was wearing a simple t-shirt with the school's mascot on it. She looked happy, tired but genuinely happy. A short distance away, Leo was in a heated game of beanbag toss with his best friend Sam. He was shouting with excitement, his speech still a little halting, but the words were clear. He spotted me and his face lit up. He abandoned his game and ran full tilt into my arms, wrapping his small body around my legs in a fierce hug. "Hi, Aunt Chloe," he yelled. It was the first time he had called me that since he was a toddler. The sound of it, so natural and easy, was like a balm on an old wound. Jessica saw the hug and wandered over, a half-spun cone of cotton candy in her hand. The awkwardness that had defined our interactions for the past year was gone. She smiled at me, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Chloe," she said. And I knew this time it was different. This wasn't a transaction. It wasn't payment for a service rendered. It was real, not just for Leo. Not just for Leo, she continued, her voice soft, for me, for showing me what's actually important. I looked from her to my nephew, who was now trying to explain the intricate rules of his beanbag game to me. My heart felt full to bursting. "He's a great kid, Jess," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "You have every right to be so proud of him." The compliment wasn't about his grades or his achievements, it was about him, his spirit, and in that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. The scars were still there, faint white lines on the landscape of our relationship, but a new, stronger foundation had been laid, built not on rivalry and resentment, but on a shared, fierce love for a little boy who had taught us both what true value really meant. The relationship I have with my sister now is a work in progress. It's not perfect, but it's real. We are building it on a foundation of honesty, not on social status or old, painful expectations. We are slowly but surely learning how to be sisters again, the vindication I thought I wanted, the satisfaction of seeing her humbled, turned out to be hollow. The real victory was watching my nephew blossom. It was seeing my sister finally become the mother he deserved, and it was realizing, after all these years, that I never needed her approval to be whole. My work, my life, my worth, they had always been valid. The world, or at least her corner of it, was just finally forced to catch up. So what do you think? Was the condition I gave my sister fair, or was it a step too far? I'd be fascinated to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I promise I read them all, and if you feel comfortable, please share your own stories of standing up for your worth, especially when it was hard. Don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and please subscribe for more stories about finding your strength in the most unexpected places. Thank you so much for listening to me today. And please remember that your value is not determined by anyone else's inability to see it.